yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
Ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles?
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan. Big day today. I feel like this is an exciting moment for the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. We've had so much fun over the past year and a half, 2 years, reading and discussing the world of the First Law. We did the original First Law trilogy. We've done all the standalones. We even started the Age of Madness trilogy, and we even interviewed Joe Abercrombie himself.
That we did.
So much love and support from all the First Law fans out there. This is a flagship series for us, monumentous part of the Friends Talking Fantasy history. We love the First Law world, and we've taken a break from it for far too long.
That we have, Charles, and I think it's time, probably far past time. You know, we did the hiatus, and probably the biggest bummer of when we had to time the hiatus was not being able to finish the Age of Madness trilogy before we had to do that. And we've been back for a little while now. Other commitments we had to get done had gotten in the way, but don't you worry, First Law fans out there. You know where our hearts really are. We have not yet made of our hearts a stone because we absolutely love and adore the First Law world and all the folks
that
out
we
there.
Do, and we're going to finish this series. I'm telling you, we are going to do it. It was so funny, back before our hiatus, one of my proudest achievements of the show was getting an advanced copy of The Wisdom of Crowds. I felt like I was holding the gold in my hands. I never thought, as a fan of First Law for over 10, 15 years, that I would get a advanced look into how this series ends. And I read through the whole trilogy, read through The Wisdom of Crowds, so that we could interview Joe Abercrombie, guys. We interviewed him. That episode is in our catalog. Scroll back and check that out. And then we took this break before we could just get the discussions recorded. And like you said, Dylan, it's one of the biggest detractors of taking the hiatus was we didn't finish it. But now we're here, and you know First Law fans that I reread this book fresh off of rereading it to have this discussion, because we know you guys expect some top tier First Law conversations to be happening, and I am super excited to be actually talking about this book with you, Dylan, for the first time here on the show.
Could have said it better myself, Charles. I reread as well. I think I've now read The Trouble with Peace 3 times, I think. And then maybe A Little Hatred 4 times. And I'm going to have a great time actually getting into this with you. I don't think we've really talked even that much, you and I, about The Trouble with Peace, but we do agree on the idea that this is Abercrombie's best novel to date. Right? Yeah, on the same page about that. I think we love all of them, obviously. And my general sense with the books is Abercrombie, as he said on our episode, he's fresh, young, still improving voice in the genre, a rising star who's already risen quite a bit. But I think he does generally keep getting better. And I'm like almost every book in the First Law universe more than the previous one. But The Trouble with Peace is the exception. The Wisdom of Crowd's way up there for me too. But I think just beginning to end, the way that this whole story arc goes, it's like as complete and fulfilling a story as we've got it. It's just it's a masterpiece, Charles.
I agree. I think this is Abercrombie has perfected his voice throughout the First Law novels, and this novel is the perfect First Law novel. I think he has been building up to this for a while. This book is full of great quotes, and the narration is so alive and so entertaining. Even when it's two characters talking about like a sea line plot, it is fascinating and funny and entertaining. And it's just perfect. And then I think he breaks all of that when he goes into Wisdom of Crowds, which we will talk about that on another day. But I think this is kind of him being like, I have perfected the First Law novel. Here it is. And now let's see where we can go after this. And what you end up with is like a masterpiece, like you said, a masterpiece.
Yeah, the Wisdom Crowds is such a subversion of, and we won't get into any of details, of course, in the Wisdom Crowds, but it's such a subversion of a typical just arc of a story
Right.
that it's jarring in some ways, and we expect subversion from Joe Abercrombie, of course, but this feels like the perfect balance, The Trouble with Peace, of course, the characters are still subversive and unique and different, and Abercrombie's voice is totally there, but it hits on these beats in such a satisfying way all the way through. And that was a big criticism that people have of the original First Law trilogy.
Right.
Is it's very much one story told throughout three relatively long novels and trilogy, and if you don't have the patience for that, then I can see how it might not be as great a fit for you. But he's gotten to this point where individual books in a trilogy tell a very complete story, and this is a fantastic.
It's hard to talk about the Blade itself as a individual book, or before they're hanged as an individual book, but I think those were his first books he'd ever written. His first published novel was The Blade itself, and now here you are. This is 8 books, into this series if you count the standalones. Maybe 9 if you count the short story anthology collection.
Sharp ends.
Yeah, so he's gotten the confidence in his voice and the confidence in his plotting and his storytelling is terrific, and so much respect for him when he just breaks it all towards the end of this novel. But for now, what I want to keep coming back to with this book is, one, just how it's like the perfect Abercrombie First Law book, and 2, how it kind of stands out as a second book in a trilogy. Like, how often do we get the second book slump in a fantasy trilogy where it's like, okay, we're still building up to the big battle, like that's gonna come in the third book, so my characters are gonna wander around for a while until I write myself to the end of the second book. But we get a trilogy so different, and a second book in a series so strong that I'm just really eager to get into the plot points.
We will, yeah. That middle book syndrome has run rampant in fantasy among trilogies, but it has not struck the age of madness, and it is time, Charles, at long last, for us to really dive into this conversation. So it also means it's time for me to give a spoiler warning. And that is that we're going to get into this. We're not going to hold back with anything in the First Law universe up to and including The Trouble with Peace. We will not get into the Wisdom of Crowds just yet, so you don't have to worry about that one. But if you haven't read up to The Trouble with Peace, then now's a good time to turn this down your headphones, catch up with your Abercrombie works, and come right on back to Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast.
Well said, Dylan. I agree completely. Let's not delay any longer. I think we should just kind of maybe jump around by character, as we tend to enjoy to do when we talk about Abercrombie's works, is really get into each character individually. And I think the character we need to start out with is King Orso, because this is a very interesting character in the world of Abercrombie, and he has a lot going for him in this book.
He does. Orso's my favorite character in this trilogy. I'm pumped to get into him. You called him off the air. We were talking a little bit, and you called him self-aware Jazal, which I I love that. I mean, in all the ways where Jazal is unable to see his privilege. Oh, and, rest in peace, Jazal.
Rest in peace, Jazal. That's,
Yeah.
too
He had a
soon.
rough life.
Too soon.
Right. Yes. And there might have been just a bit of foul play on the part of a particular magi.
I think maybe so.
Right. So anyway, yeah, in all the ways that Jazal is unable to see his privilege at the start of the First Law universe and unable to see the ways in which he hasn't really accomplished much, Orso is just so aware of those that he leans the complete other way toward this self-deprecation and this lack of confidence in his abilities. And it's only exacerbated now that he has all of this responsibility as king. It's, before he was prince, he just didn't have to step into any of these huge roles to the same extent. Now he's getting an idea of what it looks like inside things like the closed council, and he feels like he needs to step up, but he's just struggling to figure out how to do it. And this first opportunity for him to try to do well, it comes up with Federden Wetterland, who is, he is in a situation where he, I believe, raped and murdered a person, and he
in front of a bunch of people.
Right. Yes. And he is awaiting trial in the House of Questions. He has a window. Let's not forget he does have a window. Yeah, it is stressed multiple times, except for when Lord Isher is describing the situation to Leo Dan Brock, and he's like, he doesn't even have a window. It's very Abercrombie, and like several instances of people saying he has a window and it's like a nice room in the House of Questions, but then Isher has no integrity. It's like, it doesn't even have a window.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, he knows how to manipulate Leo. He's like, Leo's
right.
He would believe it instantly if I told him so.
Yeah. So anyway, Orso, he's trying to figure out what to do about Federden Wetterland here, because he's a member of the Open Council.
For sure.
So
it's like
it would be very controversial if he were to be hanged, or very controversial among the, the quote unquote little people, if the non-noble folks, if he was not hanged or something. So
let free.
Yep.
Right?
Trouble in the closed council for King Orso.
For sure. And then, of course, the closed council's advice is non-action. Just have bureaucracy, keep this guy in jail for the rest of his living life, which, to Orso's credit, he's like, certainly we can do something in these matters. So, Lord Isher talks him into this plan, which obviously was a setup to embarrass him at the actual trial, which, Lord Isher says, let him confess, but then he only portrays Wetterland as a victim of the closed council at the trial. It's like, here's the closed council, they dare to, hang one of us or imprison one of us, torture one of us. He's clearly been tortured. This is horrible. This is an outrage. And of course, Leo, totally buying into that, not having the political savvy that someone like maybe a Savine or an Orso might have to understand people have hidden agendas and are going to try and make you think a certain way by inflating
Although Orso
their
falls
ego.
right into Isher's trap too.
He does.
And I think there's a degree of naivety that Orso still has at the start, and he's almost desperately looking for someone to latch onto who's actually got some sort of honor, integrity, and desire to do well. And you have these big images of what it is like to be king, how you can make all of this difference, and he sees Isher as someone who must be on his side, and he very quickly learns that's not the case during this Wetterland incident. Alongside learning how little a king can do, how Jazal was pretty much as good as you can accomplish, just complete puppet
Right.
who is willing to just be this handsome, well-chinned, great jawline face for the Union while doing very little.
Right, but this is almost even worse because it's breeding unrest and contempt for leadership, and it kind of, Leo. This is when he leaps to his feet and denounces the trial as a travesty, much to Savine's horror, and Orso ejects Brock and sentences Wetterland to hang, which is a big deal for Orso because he hates hangings. And of course,
bloody hates hangings.
He bloody hates them. And
or
of
does
course,
he hate bloody hangings? What is it?
Both, I'm sure. And of course, he's like, I can't even hang a man right, because the joke is that Wetterland's hanging was totally botched and was this whole it didn't go right. Something went wrong with the mechanism and it was completely botched, which he's like, I can't even do this right. I look like such an idiot. I've lost control of the council and I can't even sentence a guy to hang without there being an issue, And that's a thing.
Let's go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let's go quickly back because I want to note a moment that's just a great example of how rewarding it is to read through all of Abercrombie's work. Because we do get questions sometimes where it's like, oh, can I start with a little hatred or can I just read the standalones? And the answer is yes, but like you could.
I would never
but
suggest
it's so much more rewarding to read through all of it. And even just these little moments that would mean wouldn't have much meaning to someone starting with The Age of Madness, where Bremer Dan Gorst, he's the one who removes Leo from the chamber, and he's like, it's nothing he's got a squeaky voice, like, it's nothing personal. But he's like, send my regards to your mother, which is, we know that Bremer Dan Gorst had like this giant crush on Finreed and Brock in The Heroes. So it's and such Leo's a funny little Easter egg moment. Yeah, Leo's like, this makes no sense. And Abercrombie has the restraint to just be like, look, you either get this because you've read The Heroes or you don't get it. But people just have these moments that don't really make sense sometimes to the point of view character, but make total sense to us as people who've read through all of Abercrombie's work. So I just wanted to note that because it's such a moment that means a ton for longtime readers, and it's something you could totally miss.
There's a bunch of those moments too throughout the book that I'm sure we'll pick up on.
Yeah.
There's some good ones around
multiple with
Gorst
too.
Dogman and Gorst.
Like Cardotti's House of Leisure.
Where he's acting.
Like, he's like very uncomfortable and and he's like trying very hard to make sure nothing happens to Orso.
And Jappo too.
You can enjoy yourself a little. Yeah. Oh, Jappo.
Could you imagine not reading?
He looks like a Northman, right?
Best Served Cold, and then getting that description of Jappo. But we'll get there. We're getting ahead of us.
We'll get there.
We're so eager. But it's funny to watch Gorst throughout all of this. But so Orso's obviously struggling to get some kind of authority, but he's endearing because he keeps that sense of humor, that self-deprecation that we've talked about, and he is honestly trying to do something right. And that's something we need to keep in mind as we hop around characters. Like, this is like one of the main themes of this trilogy, and particularly this book, is like the new generation coming up and replacing the old generation. Like most of these main POV characters, and like you have Leo, Orso, Savine, Ricca, they're all kind of inheriting this world, and it's interesting to see how they make the same mistakes, learn the same lessons. Like, society is not really progressing. Like, all of these things are happening. And with Orso in particular, he's trying his best to live up to this title of king. And he's learned some stuff from Giselle, but he's inherited a totally different world. And even though he's learned some of these more endearing character traits, he's not able to keep his kingdom under control. And that continues to happen with these burner attacks. We got this demonstration of Kernsbrick's steam engine, which triggers off a really fascinating Little People chapter, which I loved. That was one of the better ones, I thought. And it's the civil unrest that's happening in the city. And sure, it's nothing that Orso explicitly did to cause this. He kind of inherited these disdain for the government and all these and the crown and all of that, but he's certainly reaping all of the negative assets of it.
Yeah, I feel for Orso. I'm a big fan of his, but that is a great Little People chapter. The Little People chapters being the ones where you get this head hopping from Abercrombie. And right. Just the part of the genius of Abercrombie is to be able to so quickly ground you in a new character's voice and how they see the world. And we get that on full display in this chapter. And just, I think something interesting that Abercrombie does differently than when he's played with this in things like The Heroes is it's not like every character dies. Right. It doesn't have that same level of theme to it or that line through it. So you just really don't know what's going to happen to each character. And there's even a part where it's like in Therese's point of view.
Yes.
It was obviously a very important character.
You got the Queen Therese.
Oh my gosh, is she going to die? Yeah. It's like, is she on the chopping block right now? And there's this moment too. She's like this refined queen, Styrian woman, and then there's it's like I'm trying to remember if it's like the High Justice or something, but you get his point of view, and he's like, I've always appreciated Queen Therese in ways that other people haven't, and I know how hard it's been for her. And then he just gets his like head blown open, and like his blood is like all over Therese, and Therese is like trying to put his skull back together. It's this really gruesome scene. Mm-hmm. And you're also, I think, leading up to that, it's a really cool thing Abercrombie does in there, right? Because he runs through everyone's thought process like individually when they get their point of view, leading up to the moment of the explosion. Right. So we get kind of what everyone was thinking ahead of time, right? And how people perceive it differently. And we also get to spend a little bit of time in like Therese's point of view before, for our clean rating, the crap hits the fan. And you get to see like Therese, who's just kind of been this very staunch mother to Orso, always pushing him. You get to see underneath that exterior, that icy exterior that's been there since the original First Law trilogy. And you get to see how much she actually cares for Orso and how she feels. She's always had to
realize
play
it's
that
her
role.
Driving reason to exist. It's like the main thing that she's motivated to focus on is making sure Orso is secure and stable. Like that's her primary motivation, which is kind of endearing for her.
Yeah. And there are things that you just don't get in these other fantasy novels where people... You've said this, Charles. Some people are very precious about their point of view characters. Sacred, like George is, George R. R. Martin is one that we evoke all the time with this, where they're either a point of view character or they're not a point of view character. Yeah. And that is that. Mm-hmm. And it's so cool how Abercrombie lets us get beneath the outside view of some of these characters. So, pumped about the Little People. Great chapter, and it concludes with Uru Sulfur actually exposing himself as an eater. And you get Orso's view of like, oh, my dad said that he fought eaters in Adua way back, but this is out of control.
Right.
And he basically is able to stop the little uprising in there single-handedly. Even Gorst isn't there because Orso gave Gorst the day off. So he's like, I can't do anything right as king. Like clearly I'm like, okay, like the guy deserves one day off. I'll give it to him, and that's a day where there's this uprising this in the middle of this demonstration.
Right, exactly. And it just goes to show you how, another reason why I would recommend just starting in publication order for Abercrombie's work, because you get to see the evolution of this writing process, like you said, with the little people of, he was like starting to experiment with it a lot, particularly with the heroes, and which is the second standalone. And then he's continued to do it ever since. And I feel like in this trilogy, he's really gotten comfortable with using it as a device, not just to be creative with POV and showing that, these decisions had consequences and affected people's lives. Life is cheap, that kind of stuff. But he's also presenting different sides of a very complicated, like, social movement, class movement going on in this world that started in a little hatred with the situation. Was it Valbreck where they rose up? Was that first city? And then now here, because he's trying to portray that kind of industrial revolution, workers' rights, like, movement, and he's showing some of that in these moments. Not every character dies, and you get little glimpses into POV characters that may change your perception of the character, and overall it's really fascinating. And then you end it with Eurosulfur revealing to be an eater, even though we're told, oh, magic is leaving the world and blah blah blah, but I can still be the boss if I want to. Like, I still have these powers, and it's a fun reminder that there's still some cards to be played with poor Eurosulfur. He's still a presence, a threat, even though people are taking the banking house of Valentinbach very lightly these days. Eurosulfur, well,
maybe
still
not
around.
The banking house. They're taking the idea of magi very lightly.
Right,
I think people take the banking house very seriously. They just don't.
Yeah, but they're criticizing. They're more open in criticizing it and attacking it than they ever would have before.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that they burned in Valbek was the bank.
Exactly.
That's like the big thing that Baez and Sulfur are so pissed about, is like, okay, do what you want, but you don't burn a bank of Valentinbach. That is, no. I mean, the real power.
My master would be most displeased, which is like the biggest threat you could say to somebody in this world.
It is interesting, though, and it's another thing that I've thought about reading this series through the lens of what would it be like to just start with Age of Madness, is the character of Baez is overwhelmingly, in this series, like, his threat is built upon just people being like, don't mess with that guy.
Right.
Like, that guy's a lot of trouble. Mm-hmm. But there's not as much show of that in this series. True. Anywhere near to the extent that there's show of that
this is one of the first
in the First Law trilogy. Yeah. So
Baez makes an appearance at the beginning of this book, but you don't get a true sense of what he can do. I am greater than Juvens.
I'm greater than Eos himself. It's like, you hear that he did things like that, but it's just not the same without having witnessed who Baez is.
And it's almost kind of the point, right? Because you have these characters like making the same mistakes. You have a Glocta telling Savine, like, don't make any deals with Valentinbach. Like, don't talk like to Baez. And then they talk to Baez and they can't help but be like, why is this guy talking to me? He's a short little man. And he's a bald old guy. Like, I don't... who cares? I'll be a little arrogant towards him. It's like, I've got power. I've got influence in court. Like, I can, dance with this guy toe to toe in a conversation. And meanwhile, Glock just like terrified, like, don't like be doing that stuff. Okay. He's a dangerous guy. And it's those same mistakes being made over and over again. And I think you have a whole new generation of people being like, burn the bank. So it's like, you don't know what they're capable of, though. So you may not want to do that. It's not that simple, kind of a thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I've never thought of it through the lens that you're talking about right now, where it actually helps to get the themes across of the novels, where if you are only in the new generation's point of views, which is where we are. I mean, probably the oldest person that we're following is Gunnar Broad, and it's not like he was wrapped up in any of the previous events.
Well, I'll also say that Clover held one of the shields with
Clover.
Versus,
Clover is
Logan.
Probably the oldest. That's a great point. But it's not like Clover was involved in any of the real like political machinations of any of that stuff. He held the shield in the fight between Fenris and Logan, but
Right.
he's kind of laid back since. And I'll also say that Clover is almost supposed to contrast with a lot of our newer generation characters,
Hmm.
where he's realized the best that someone like him can hope for is just to get out of the way
Right.
of all of these
Someone
things.
like
He's not
Stour,
actually
who's
right.
relearning all, he's like making these same mistakes, and Clover sees that and knows that he's like making these mistakes and like is a bad guy, but he doesn't like take them on, until of course the end of this book. But it's one of those things where it's like he follows orders, he does what he's told to do, he gives them counsel until that moment where the balance of powers change and opportunity strikes. But he knows, like, he's that seasoned veteran. He's like, you just
Yeah.
gotta let these kids make their mistakes. Why getting involved isn't gonna change anything. It'll just get you killed. Like kill Wonderful, kill your friends, but like you got to take the moments when they make sense. And he talks about surprise a lot in this book, which is, rereading it was kind of
Great
funny.
foreshadowing.
Great foreshadowing, where it's like, surprise is the best tool you have against an enemy, right? It's like,
Right. And you got to pick your moment.
you gotta pick your moment exactly when they're fighting the Shenka. So yeah, it's when you're talking about the future generations making the same mistakes. Here's someone who remembers the last generation and has learned those lessons and has become not this wise guidance of beacon of knowledge, but more of like, I'm going my own lane here. Like, let them do what they want to do. I'm staying out of it. I recognize how to get killed when I see it. Okay, so it's kind of funny to see that through him.
On the Clover talk, I just want to say I absolutely adore that scene where he's talking to Calder, and Calder just keeps going on and on about like, we have these problems, like Stour, he's the future of the North, but he's reckless, and he's going through all of these things, and Clover just keeps going, and then there's like a reflection where he's like, that's the perfect response because people can just hear whatever they want when you go,
Exactly. He survived
It's
this
like,
long. He's one of the few. So he's got those survival tactics, which is like, let these power players play out what they're going to do and just try and be on the winning side. That's his mantra. But before we get too far down the Clover rabbit hole here, I want to proceed also to the end here, because after that whole steam engine debacle, we go to what is perhaps my favorite scene in this novel, and what is also perhaps one of the best audiobook performances I've ever heard, which is the meetings with King Jappo in Cardati's House
that
of
is very good.
Leisure. Like, these scenes are great. The performance that Stephen Pacey has when he's playing Jappo as this blasé guy who's got this gravelly, like,
Nice blasé drop.
what?
Nice drop with blasé.
Thank you.
Keep going. Man.
Well, that because he's got like the open robe. He's in this debaucherous place, but he's got this menacing voice, and he's putting on this air of like, oh, I'm the lazy son who inherited all this and just wants to like do drugs and explore all my sexual desires and all this, and that's kind of all I'm into. And it's just funny. I just love those scenes where you have Leo and then you have Orso, and they both take a meeting with Jappo, and you learn about Jappo as it goes. It's the great scenes. I mean, these are some of the best scenes in the book for me.
Fantastic, and you get this just inability from Leo to even understand anything about what's going on when he's interacting with Jappo. You also get and this is a very interesting portrayal where Leo, it's pretty clear at this point that he's somewhere not just straight on the spectrum of his sexuality,
Yeah.
but he's repressed. Like
Right.
he can't stop looking at that Japo has this like open shirt and kind of like a revealing lower garment as well, and he's trying so hard not to focus on it. So he's completely out of his element, Leo, and he even just detests Japo to the point where he's unwilling to offer all the things that Savine told him he should offer. Meanwhile, Orso goes in there and he's got less to offer Japo, but they're like two sides of the same coin, and they kind of hit it off. And it's great character writing because you learn about Japo from Leo's interactions with him, and then it makes total sense when Orso comes in and they do pretty much get along.
It also is one of the things I love about Orso's character is that he actually is pretty good at what he does. Like, he has talent and he has like some natural abilities to lead, but he's just like he's got all these things set up against him, like the people hate him, and like he's inherited this close council that's so connected from society, and all these riots and things. And in moments like this where he's able to make a connection with Japo and like relate to him and kind of uncover some of the performance that he's putting on to make that connection, he actually wins Japo's respect. And Japo's like, well, okay, I guess I'll just stay out of it, you know? And you're like, oh, that's pretty cool that like Orso is able to get the W on Leo from that. Like you said, with no cards, he's like, other than like that Leo guy, he's kind of kind of annoying, kind of an idiot, right?
Ass. Yeah.
And he's like, you've got a point there.
Yeah.
I hate that guy. There was a line, I'm looking for it, where they had something about the idea of like this idea of, I find reputations rarely fit people all that well. What are they after all but costumes we put on to disguise ourselves? They're making this connection of like, we are like second generation royalty, like people think about us in a certain way, but we have our own stuff going on, and they were able to make that connection. I love dialogue where there's double meanings and like second hand plot points being implied. Game of Thrones does a great job of it, and this scene does a great job of it too, between Orso and Japo, of like hey, we're both kind of like got a lot in common here. There's comments about like understanding people's sexual preferences and stuff. It's like they get each other, right? And they've read the same books and they're geeking out over that. And Japo kind of stands up, like buttons their robe up, and is like, "Oh, you got my ruse." Like that kind of stuff was super entertaining.
Well, we get that costume type talk starting with the masks, like the literal masks at first, that Orso's like, we should take these off, and Japo's like, that's not what people do here. I'm not going to do the awesome voice that you were able to get going there. I don't have that kind of vocal range, Charles, but first he's like, we should take these masks off, and then Orso's like Japo's telling Orso like, that's not the thing that's done. And Orso's like, we're kings, like, or we can do whatever. What we do is what's done. And Japo's like, fair enough. And then they're talking further, and then Orso realizes, okay, you're like me. And he's like, we should also remove the masks of this, like, we're profligate idiots who grew up in privilege and have no ability to actually understand anything politically. We're not sharp at all intellectually. It's like, that's not true. So I want you to show that.
More than hang out.
You want me to,
to,
right? You want me to take that mask off too? And I love that. Like you're saying, the double meanings and the play from the literal to the figurative mask. It's brilliantly done, that scene all around.
And they're both like, why are we gonna? Do we really want to inherit this conflict? It's like I've never been to Styria. I've heard it's nice, but I don't care. That kind of stuff. And he's like, yeah, you got a point. I much prefer to hang out here than like try and march into battle. Gross. So they're having that mutual connection. And at the end, it's basically just like, well, I can't. I have no interest in doing anything. And it's like, okay, that's the best I can hope for. It's like, I just won't try. So really fascinating conversation. One of the best written, like, double entendre dialogue scenes. And how great is it that we read Best Served Cold and Mercado's like, I don't know, this baby could be anybody, but he's going to be the, like, heir apparent no matter what. And I'm going to say he's the heir of this lord. And then now confirmed that it's Shiver's son. Like, how great is that?
all but confirmed.
Exactly. I mean, it looks like a Northman. Sounds like the performance sounds like Shiver's voice. It is his son. I mean, Abercrombie was at least deft enough to not outright say it. Like, he does that a lot. I like Abercrombie's willingness to trust the reader to make connections and not explicitly say everything. He's very good at that. He commits to characters' POVs. None of those characters would be like, oh, you're related to Shivers. So he can't make that connection because none of these, like Leo and Orso, don't know who Shivers is. So they could say he looks kind of like a Northman, like, because Leo's seen a lot of Northmen. Maybe Leo does know who Shivers is. He must. But he didn't make that connection.
Yeah, Leo's not always the
He's
most
not very observant.
Yeah,
anyway, exactly.
And the mask didn't come off for Leo, which is another... Yeah. I think that the thing that we get there is basically confirmation that it's not Rogan's son. It is Shiver's son, which is pretty incredible to think. And it is another one of those moments that means nothing, really, to a person who would be a new reader. You're just like, okay, guess this guy looks like a Northman. And that means so much to us as people who have read through all of these previous books. So absolutely love that. Love the restraint like you were talking about. It's my only complaint is we don't get more Japo in this book. I love more which is Japo. Such a
Japo stole the scene. Shame. He stole the scene. He came so off the page. The performance was excellent. I was like, this guy, I love this guy. But, he's too smart to get involved in all of this. I love how Mons Mercado's just going around, like, independent of all the Magi, spanking the Union at every turn. Like, all that is so great that she was able to do all
Helps
of that.
When you have Shanked on your side.
Yes, she does have Shanked and Vitari and all that, but we'll get more into that in a short while. But I feel like we should round out the Orso conversation. Another nice thing he does while he's here is he like releases his mother. That was kind of a good show of respect and compassion from Orso. Orso's definitely one of the most compassionate people in this whole series. And he's like, I could tell that, this is where you want to be. This is the person you love, and I want that for you. And then he gives her a purpose, like, find me a wife and make sure she's Styrian. Like those kind of olive branch things, like very political, very thoughtful, very compassionate. And we love that for Orso.
We do love that for Orso. It's so interesting to contrast him with Jazal, despite so many similarities, where it's like you come the total opposite way, I think, with how you feel about Orso than how like one feels about Jazal at the start of the original First Law, where it's like Orso's just beating himself up constantly. And then you see in his actions, like, dude, you're not that bad. Like, you have a lot of skill sets. You are generally good-natured. You're doing your best here. Right. And he does, I think, have, of all the point of view characters, probably the most compassion. I'm trying to think.
It's interesting coming up reading Jazal, Jazal's like, I deserve this, absolutely. Right. Even though he may be humbled on the road and learn some humility. The minute they're like, hey, you want to be a general? It's like, yeah, I deserve that. Whereas Orso's like, this is a joke, right? Like, why am I here doing this? Like, something must have surely gone wrong for me to be in charge. You know, it's a funny, like, it's two different ways to look at privilege, right? You have ones where, like, Giselle is affluenza to a peak.
Nice.
And then Orso is at least self-deprecating enough to realize, like, he's there's humor in the fact that of all people he's the one in this point of privilege. So it's a nice little progression for the Giselle family.
Yeah. And by the way, Charles, we got blasé from you. We got affluenza. You're killing it over there.
I learned that one from you when we talked about Giselle last time. You dropped that line about him, and I never forgot.
Oh wow! So it was a little self-congratulatory there, but that makes sense while we're talking about Giselle. So
yeah,
let's talk about the. I mean, after Joppa, we're pretty much getting toward Orso getting that army ready to face off against a rebellion, and we're getting to the point where we get that dinner scene. I don't know if that's the next thing you want to talk about, Charles, but I really like that scene.
What's interesting is, again, this is another like rare W for Orso. We get to see these moments that he is competent and capable. Like, we've had a few, right? He was able to track down Lord Marshal Brint as the conspirator, right? He reports back to the council about his visits in Styria, where he learned that basically, look, Orso is ready to attack, and we need to prepare to mount a defense. And then he uses that as a way to find out who's been tipping off Leo this whole time, and it proves to be Lord Marshal Brint. And that was a very clever plan. And even Teufel, who's the most clever of everyone, was like, gotta give Orso credit for that plan. It actually worked. So that happens. And then he's parlaying with Leo, and just absolutely, like, Leo just plays into his hand so completely in this. They make it clear a bunch of times that if Leo just charged at the beginning, he held all the cards to win, but Orso is holding on. He sent Teufel out there, and he invited Leo to dinner, and just stalled him.
One of my favorite moments around this scene is, by the way, love Corporal Tunney. I'm obsessed with Corporal Tunney as a character who's fantastic.
That's another reward for people reading all the books is Tunney.
And he's still corporal.
And he's like, be careful, I'll make you admiral. And he's like, you wouldn't dare.
Right. He's very happy where he is. So he... And by the way, there's a lot of Tunney, like redemption. Even I don't know if redemption's the right word because he did anything terrible, but like Tunney actually showing bravery and courage throughout this. But he's weirdly like one of the most loyal guys in this book to Orso. It's
right. He has some real character growth, which would go unnoticed to someone just starting out. But the fact that he was willing to hold a standard and defend Orso. This guy dedicated his whole life to not fighting. This is the most, like, this guy thrives in, like, mediocrity. He's like, you want to be mediocre. You need to find the level where you're important enough to not do the crap jobs, but not too important where you have any responsibility. He's like, there's that sweet spot in there somewhere.
He's a less violent he's a less violent version of Clover's attitude.
Yeah, him and Clover have a lot in common about, like, how to live life and survive, you know?
Yeah. Clover feels way more, I guess, I don't know if Machiavellian's the right word because he's not ambitious, but he's just way more willing to do just awful things than I think Tunney would. But anyway, the moment I'm talking about that I love is how Orso is like, okay, we gotta stall as long as possible. So he's like, Tunney, I want you to go over there, and I want your salute to take like a half an hour or whatever he says. And then you get Leo's perspective when Tunney shows up, and Leo just is like, oh, the guy dropped such an amazing salute on me. He's like, all my, like, all the officers, even of much higher rank than him, like, they could learn a thing or two from this corporal. And then you just know it's like Corporal Tunney just giving the most flamboyant, ostentatious
I love
salute he could think
also
of.
that Tunney has mastered the salute and can give an amazing one, because here's someone who could care less about like the cause and like the chain of command and all of that, but he knows that by perfecting the salute he gets to like keep like staying under the radar, right? So it's like, oh, I can do the salute, just don't ask me to actually fight somebody, but I can do this part, and it's
Right.
so many beautiful things coming together. It's what makes this book so masterful, like the fact that it's built on all the other work Abercrombie's written so far, and it comes together so beautifully and interwoven, and these moments have multiple points of impact, and that's just another hilarious, fantastic. It's just a guy giving a salute, but it's built off of 6 different plot points that we've read across 9 books. It's incredible.
It's one of the things I remember when we first got back to rereading Trouble with Peace. You shot me a text, Charles, and it was like, it's so nice to be back in the world of Abercrombie because he is able to make just these simple, oftentimes just conversation scenes, things like that, so entertaining in a way that's so rare in the genre.
Yes.
And these kind of moments are exactly them, right? We spent probably over 5 minutes talking about just this funny individual moment of a salute. And it's like, who else makes one salute this like noteworthy, hilarious thing built on books, like previous books, entire point of views?
Nobody.
It's like nobody else does it like that.
So
It's
true. Every
wonderful.
line in this book could be quotable. It's so rich with that voice that it's why I keep calling it the perfect Abercrombie book. It really is. And this moment where Orso's stalling for time with Leo, and Leo's just eating it up. Except the actual, Orso's like, oh, you really have to try this cooking. You really have to try this food. And Leo's like, forget the
The
food.
liver
Like,
melts in your mouth, Charles.
the liver, right? The liver did sound good. I've never been hungry for liver before, but I'd give
neither.
that a try. It's good.
It wouldn't be my choice for the dinner if I was trying to stall. I'd be like, I don't know, maybe
the
back
fish
in
course,
that time.
they had a bunch of courses come out.
That was the main, though. The main course was the liver, I think.
Right, I think so.
I think you can do better than liver for the main course, but it does melt in your mouth.
So there you go, a great scene. Then you have the actual battle take place where Orso's just prepared at every moment, surprise cannon attacks. He's got Lord Marshal Ruckstead's reinforcements arriving, forcing Leo into a charge. And just when he reaches the town square, it's abandoned. And that's when the cannon ambush happens and just opens fire on Leo and his charge. And what you get is like a really crazy ending to a second book in a trilogy where Leo Dan Brock is completely cut down.
Because the reinforcements come in time.
Exactly. And like he could have had it
thanks
all,
to stalling.
He could have had it all, and he blew it. And this totally reckless plan, I think we should jump into some of Leo and Savine's plotting to get to this point. But all of it was so bold and daring, and you could say misguided too. Totally comes to this moment where they lose it all so spectacularly. His arm becomes unusable. He loses a leg. He loses his good leg, which is funny because now his bad leg is his good leg. All that
His only
stuff.
leg.
Yeah, so all that stuff happens. Completely cut down, sentenced to hang. And here's Orso's thing with hangings again, coming up at the end of this book. Such a great build up to this scene where you have, again, how many times has Orso said he hates bloody hangings? We have the hanging in the beginning of this book that gets totally botched, and then now you have a hanging at the end. And again, you have someone that I didn't miss and was kind of happy to see go was Wetterland's mother get hanged.
Yeah.
I was like, okay,
actually,
I don't feel bad about that one. But it's all built like Orso's complicated relationship with Savine, and then like his complicated relationship with hangings, his ability for compassion. It's all been so lovingly
I don't know how complicated his relationship with hangings is. I'm pretty sure he stands strongly on that he hates them.
but he hates them, but he
has to keep giving
orders them, but they don't go right. Like all this stuff is being built up. Within this book is being built up so incredibly well to the payoff of this moment where Orso staring at Savine, like Leo's next in line to be hanged, and he just can't stomach it, and he says stop, life imprisonment, and runs off. And that's where Orso's arc ends in this book.
He also finds out that Savine is his sister.
Yes, because Savine's defeated, discovered, and Orso visits her and is like, why would you do this to me? Like, I don't
And why
understand
didn't he was more concerned
Yes.
about why she didn't accept the proposal.
All right, so let's talk about Savine and Leo for a second. I feel like that's a natural transition from all this Orso conversation. Their storyline is pretty similar, but one of the scenes at the beginning of the book that I wanted to talk about was how Finri and Artie kind of ambush both Savine and Leo to orchestrate this wedding proposal. It's a fun scene.
It is a fun scene. They're two characters that we know from previous installments to be these two clever women who are in their own way, like Finri's a bit more like military, like daughter of a Lord Marshal type, and Artie's a bit more silly, and we remember
But a lot of common
remember a lot of
sense,
that from the
just
original.
also a bit too fond of drinking and,
True.
not being too
Yeah,
serious.
no, I mean silly more in just the way that she speaks
talks,
and
yeah.
all that. She's obviously clever as well.
Yes.
And I mean they came up with a really good plan though, and one that you can't really deny from the perspectives of either Leo or Savine. It's like at this point Savine is already pregnant with her after having sex with Leo in Swarberg's office, and we know that she can't really hide it that much longer, and it's Leo's kid. So what is there to do from the perspective of this time's social structure but marry Leo? And he's a very eligible bachelor in this society, and she seems like a really good match for her. Like kind of this brains and the brawn type
Right.
situation, actually pretty similar to Finri's previous marriage. Or not previous marriage, but obviously
Right.
she's widowed now.
The strategic alliance, right? Finri and Artie, two interesting people to put in a room. Even their names are kind of similar, so it was funny to see them working together. And this was a plan that was pulled off spectacularly, right then and there. They're engaged to be wed, and it's like, hey, we have Lord Isher getting married, and he so politely agreed to share his wedding day with the two of you so you can all get married together. That's the kind of the way that this was all pulled off. And there was a line in here that was kind of funny where Leo and Savine were talking, and somehow Glocta came up in the conversation, and it's like, wow, you're willing to be real, have Glocta for a father-in-law. And then the narration was something like, he wasn't aware of it before, but he sure was now. Like a pig is aware of the slaughter or the butcher or something like that was the line. It was one of those, again, like scathing, like the way sometimes Abercrombie doesn't hesitate to make fun of his own characters through their own narration. It's like this guy is as unaware as a pig being led to slaughter, like that kind of a comparison.
Right. Leo is a bit of our punching bag for the. We used to talk about how Jazal would get roasted a lot by the pros, where there's that one sentence we would quote in before they were hanged, where it's like he became dimly aware that word dimly is just scathing, dimly aware that he might have had a privileged life.
Right.
And Leo gets beat up sometimes by the pros, and you'd think anyone with a bit of sense would be thinking about, oh, if I'm marrying Savine den Glocta, that means that Glocta, the Archlector, is going to be my father-in-law. That's probably one of the first things that they'd think about. But
Right.
not Leo. He's not always the sharpest tool. Not that he's a unintelligent person, but he's just like not a deep thinker.
Right.
Here.
This
He's
bigger
just
picture that
kinda-
he's not been able to see, and the fact that Finrian already got him into this situation and all of that. This is also kind of like a restart for Savine. Savine, at the beginning of this book, is still kind of suffering from the PTSD of when she survived the rebellion in Valbrek, and
Valbec.
Valbec, and she's also trying to save face in court. She's not as dominating a presence as she once was, and some of her competitors are trying to like sneak in and fill those cracks. So this is almost like, yeah, you know what? I was going to be queen, like, and that was like this. I was so close to that, and that was like this awesome thing that was going on for me. It was all taken away, but this is an opportunity. Like, he does have good standing. People like him. I can work with this. She sees it as a sensible match, and she agrees to it, and that kind of starts off Savine's path in this story as well.
Right. She sees how likable I guess like the image or persona of Leo seems to be. It's one of those things. It's like what Japo said a while back, where he's like, I was expecting to detest you or so and love the young lion based on those reputations of yours.
Right.
Meanwhile, Leo is a pretty unlikable person a lot of times when you actually get to know him, but the idea of Leo is what Savine wants to work with. And the idea of Leo is this, for some reason, man of the people, just because he's like actually a fighter, and it's kind of this narrative that he was left to his own devices up north. That part's true, that he was left to his own devices and fought up north.
Right.
But for some reason, he became like this rallying cry for the people, and also he's this noble who is the picture of what people are supposed to be in the Union, right? Brave and handsome and a real like force to be around, at least like physically, in his presence, even if he doesn't have the political know-how of someone like Savine. But that's part of why she sees him as a great match.
Exactly. And Savine is able to make those back alley negotiations a lot of the time, helping him make those political alliances, guiding him. And this is what she's learning being married to Leo in these early moments of like how to guide Leo, because he's so bullheaded, right? And he's so quick to a temper, quick to decide, and like you're trying to get him to make the right decision. So she's like, oh, what do you think about this? Are you sure you want to do that? Like this, that. She's trying to guide him. And there's this one, the scene where they're in the balcony, and they literally start like getting intimate. To me, there's that expression like grab him by the balls. She like literally does that in that scene, which is just kind of a funny thing of like how she kind of sees the beginnings of their relationship. She tries to make all these plans, and like behind his back, basically using him as this like this shield, this presence of like he's pure and good and loved by the people, and I can do all the back alley stuff to keep this machine running. I can be that for him. And that's readily apparent when Savine learns of these talks of rebellion.
Mhm. Leo had been at first almost just talk about, oh, this is what's going on, blah, blah, with Isher and Barazin. But then it starts to form into something a lot more real before Savine even gets involved. But once Savine gets involved, she pretty much takes over in terms of the actual planning. And there's all these moments with basically everyone they come into contact with. That would be like the Isher crew, then it would be Stour Nightfall, and then or it was Rika, and then Stour Nightfall. All those moments you get Savine ensuring that Leo is out of earshot, and then she starts running the show in terms of the negotiation. So with Isher, she actually fakes that she's having some sort of like pain from her pregnancy.
Oh, right.
And Leo, at that time, he's still got some good-natured fool stuff to him, and he starts running out of the room. I'm gonna go get someone to help you. And then Isher's like, "Oh, are you okay?" And she's like, "I'm fine. Like, let's talk.
Let's talk business." Right.
Right. And she's like, who do you imagine is going to be on the throne at the end of this? And Isher, even the snake he is like, Orso? And she's like, no. Like, at the end of this, Leo will be on the throne. And he's like, okay. So that's how it starts, is Savine, and there's a lot of justifications that Savine makes during this, like, pre-Isher moment where she's like, oh, like, I'm already walking into this. I have no option but to pretty much take this over and make sure it goes the way that they're planning. I don't know how much I completely buy all of them. I see her thinking, but I think she's doing a lot of rationalizing, and what she really wants is to be on the, be there
for
with
sure.
Leo
She
on
was
the throne,
tempted by the grab for power. She saw she had enough cards to do it, make an honest go of it, and she went for it. It's one of those things where it's like, she could have talked Leo out of it, and Leo had no means to stage a rebellion, but she's like, if we're gonna do this, we gotta do it right. And then she brings it past the point of no return, and making these deals with Isher and Stour Nightfall, and that was a good exchange of dialogue, Stour Nightfall and Savine, where Savine knew to like stand her ground, and Stour's like, oh, say one thing about Leo, he's got good taste in women, and all this back and forth between the two of them was kind of fun. And yeah, for sure, she's the one taking this way further than Leo could have ever taken it on his own. And surely, like, his mother would have tried to stop him or any of these other things, but here's Savine egging him on. Yeah, she did. Finri did urge him to go. Yeah.
Yeah, that moment you're talking about with Stour is great. She basically walks up to him in a way where he's kind of got the sword out, and walks up to him where he basically has a choice to drop the sword or to stab her, and he like drops the sword, like clatters to the ground, kind of embarrassing for him. And
she called his bluff, basically.
She has a lot of presence, political acumen, and all of that, and it's on full display. But we use the word a lot, Machiavellian, in how she goes about it. She discusses with Rika, who they actually had a pretty sweet moment in A Little Hatred, where they exchanged the like necklace and like the runes and the whole thing, right?
Savine still wears the
They basically
runes.
exchanged necklaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's this very nice moment. It's kind of like Rika seems happy to see Savine. Savine seems happy to see Rika. And then it's got this like moment where you think, okay, they might actually be a good fit to work together here. And then she just goes completely behind Rika's back later with how she deals with Stour. She's like, oh yeah, well, if we end up on the throne, maybe that protectorate doesn't get protected so well. And
and well,
Stour
because remember, because she was negotiating with Rika, and she was basically just playing the bully card of like, I'm not negotiating with you at all. Like, and then Rika's like, so basically, I do nothing and I get less except for this fine silk you're offering me. Like, this is all I get for agreeing to fight with you. And she's like, yeah, you're not going to get a better offer once Leo takes the throne. You know, she's straight up threatening her, which Rika does not take kindly to. And it's a bold move from Savine to go to someone who showed you compassion and friendship and threaten them, essentially. So that was tough. And then of course she goes straight to the wolf, like you were saying, Stour Nightfall, to promise Ulfrith, which is not cool, Savine.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard how conniving Savine is. We've heard that a lot from A Little Hatred, but I think A Little Hatred was this almost grounding experience for Savine.
Yes.
And she has to see what's actually out there for the quote-unquote little people and how hard it is. And you think maybe she's going through some character growth, and then she backtracks to her old self as soon as she gets this opportunity to potentially put Leo on the throne and seize some power for herself. And that's on full display here.
For sure. She keeps thinking in her head about like that moment where she felt powerless and how she never wanted to feel powerless again. And she interprets that as a way to just vie for the throne. It's an interesting way she talks herself into this. And let's see what happens next in the story here. We talked about the King Japo moments. I think the only thing extra interesting here is that Leo walks in on his friends Jurand and how do you say his name? Gloward. Being intimate. And that like short circuits Leo's brain. He was already all flustered from dealing with Japo's open homosexuality to then run into a room to see two of his friends, of which he's had like these conflicting thoughts about. You were mentioning, Dylan, how he's kind of repressing those.
I mean, him and Jurand have this moment even before, and there's so much. It's all subtle subtext because we're stuck in Leo's perspective, and he is so repressed he can't see it himself.
Right.
But there's all these moments where it's so clear that he has feelings for Jurand, and it's pretty clear Jurand has feelings for him. And it's even when he comes back and he's married, there's a moment in the prose where it's like, he for some reason felt like he had betrayed something like with Jurand, and there's this like unspoken agreement that he wasn't.
Well, even says he feels something, and then he also feels something downstairs. You know, like this. That's all that kind of stuff.
He's like, and basically, it's like he tells himself he's disgusted, but I think what he really is feels betrayed by Jurand, like being with Gloward instead of him.
He's also forced to face his own like repression too, which I can imagine is a lot to handle.
Right. I mean, sometimes that's how it like shows up for people. Is their experience of is they think they're disgusted, but it's what they're disgusted in is that they themselves are repressed, and there's a part of themselves that they're refusing to acknowledge. And that shows up. There's a moment before he walks in on Jurand and Gloward where he basically is having this like very close to romantic intimate situation with Jurand, and you think maybe actually something's gonna happen between them, and then I think it's Gloward like walks in with, or not Gloward, someone else, one of their other friends that they're with, like walks in, and he's like, hey, like drinks for everyone, and then Leo's like, oh yeah, and then it's like, oh, whatever that moment was, it was kind of lost, and that was that. So that's an interesting moment, and one that definitely took me by surprise the first time I read it.
Right. And Abercrombie has a deft hand with all of that stuff. He's been writing in those details, like the things Leo notices about Jurand, the way he feels about Jurand at certain times, to then face that stuff with Jappo, and then this. It's all very interesting. And what it does is it's another one of Leo's blunders where he kind of he defriends them essentially and like cuts them out of his
Blocked
plans.
on Facebook.
Yeah, blocked on Facebook, exactly. And he's like, I'm doing this without them. I don't need them and their like debaucherous ways messing up my party. And that's the thing. Like he's so misguided in his thoughts and his beliefs. Like when Savine, oh wait, I can't remember if Savine finds out in this book or not. Does she?
She doesn't find out the reason. Right. She knows that she obviously knows Gerund isn't there. Right. But I just can't doesn't know why. Out. Okay, well. She finds out in the next. I mean, this is. I don't know if this is spoilery. It's a very minor thing, but she does find out in the next.
I won't go into detail, but yeah, when that it's like what like not a good enough reason to cast aside your most trusted and talented advisor when you're risking everything on this one battle. Not what you want to do is cast him away because you don't like that he's gay. It's like a crazy thing to do. But Leo is kind of he's arrogant. He's
and bigoted
for sure. He's been bigoted a few times also. So it's just like doesn't have that kind of emotional depth or maturity to be like, it's okay that people are different from you and you can still work with them and like them and all these other things. It's like you don't need to be so bullheaded and obnoxious. So, but that's just another one of Leo's big mistakes, which is how he ends up losing ultimately this big battle at the end. But I like the scene where Leo is preparing to leave to go to Midderland, and then you have Finnery begging him not to go. And this idea of, learning from past mistakes and not repeating the same mistakes as the last generation. And here's Leo just charging into the same issues that we've seen before. And here you have his mom, Finnery, begging him not to go, being like, you don't understand. Yoru Sulfur's there and lets him go, which is kind of interesting. And he just won't listen. And Savine says, oh, you're yesterday's woman, which is like...
Well, I think that's harsh. In the prose, right? She doesn't say that, actually.
She doesn't? Well, she thinks it.
She thinks it. Yeah, she's like, she basically is reflecting that she feels bad, but she's like, Finnery's yesterday's woman. This is time. And that's that's a through line that runs in a lot of Abercrombie's work, is this idea of like yesterday's man, yesterday's woman, and I think that Casca has a moment where he's talking to someone in, I think it's Red Country.
It sounds like Red Country.
Yeah, he's like, I'm yesterday's man, and you are so the time that you would be relevant to is so far away it might as well have never happened. I forget exactly the context.
Oh yeah, he was talking to the ghosts or something like that, I think.
The leader of the ghosts, whose name escapes me, and he's like, and the leader of the ghosts is trying to resurrect the quote unquote dragon, and he's like, this is so far in the past, it's irrelevant. And that's part of this theme of having to learn their own, go through their own mistakes and learn from those rather than being able to take the advice.
You can't just teach everything to the next generation. Sometimes they have to make their own mistakes. And I think Clover said something very similar in this book too, of you can't tell these people what to do. You just gotta let them do it and keep your distance and try not to get killed in the process.
Very Clover.
Yeah. I think he has those kinds of philosophies about him as well. I mean, it's one of the main themes of the book is this generational, humanity is just always doomed. We're always going to make the same mistakes. It's kind of funny how we do that. But yeah, that ends, Leo and Savine. That brings us back to the hanging and or so showing a moment of mercy. And the one quote that
much to Eurosulfur's distaste.
Exactly.
By the way,
my master will be most displeased. For sure. And I think there was this book has a couple parts in it, right? And in each part, Abercrombie drops an actual quote, as he does throughout his whole First Lost series. And one of them, he quotes Friedrich Nietzsche when he says, "In times of peace..." Nietzsche. "In times of peace, the warlike man attacks himself." And this is kind of to me, this is Leo to a T, where, everything's good. He's got good standing in England. He's got his health. He just can't help but be enraged. And that dinner with Orso is so what are you going to do? You're going to replace my men with your men, and you think that's going to solve anything?
My cronies with your cronies, exactly. My incompetent,
and Orso and Leo realized he actually didn't have a plan. He was just charging in, bullheaded. No plans for the policies he's going to enact once he takes over. And Orso's this is a complete waste that this even had to happen. And it's interesting to see. There's another line that I wanted to pull something about. Oh yes, a man shows his quality when circumstances are against him. There's another line in this book, and these last moments with Leo when he's about to be hanged, some of the first times he's really been tested and really ever up until now he's always won and people have always loved him, and he's almost had this fantasy in his head that he's immortal, and that comes with youth, right? Thinking that, oh, you can't die, I'll charge in like the heroes of old kind of thing. And now that he's been so utterly defeated, his narrative in those last few moments of what was I thinking that whole time? I had everything and I blew it. It's a really fascinating show of his character. He's finally starting to learn some of these lessons that Finrey and Savine and others have been trying to teach him. Even Jurand, to some extent, teach him, that he just kept charging into battle after battle after battle, risking everything. I don't think he realized how much he was truly risking until those final moments.
Definitely, and we get a good quote during those seemingly final moments. They are final moments in the end, where we get, Leo saw now that his father had been wrong. It's after the battle. That's when a man finds out who he truly is. He was no hero. He never had been. He was a fool, a great bloated tower of vanity. It had got his friends, his allies, and hundreds who'd followed him killed. Now it would get him killed too.
It only took complete and utter defeat for him to learn that lesson.
And it's interesting when we have that confrontation between Orso and Leo post-battle, and Orso tells him something along the lines of of all the hundreds of people who have gotten killed in this debacle of a battle, you are one of the few who can truly say that they are responsible for what happened to them.
True. It's a great moment.
Made the choices.
Orso really daddies up on Leo in that scene. I love that.
He does. Yeah. And he's he walks in there and he's with Bremer Dan Gorst, and he's just leave me with Leo, and Bremer Dan Gorst doesn't want to do it. And then he's what's he gonna do? Bite me? Right. Trust me, I'm safe at this point.
Exactly, and that's a really humbling thing for Leo, who up until this point that was his main strength, his strong body, and now that was completely taken away from him. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of person he is in the beginning of the next book.
Well, we know, but it'll be interesting to talk about it.
Yes.
Wisdom of Crowds episode, but we must continue to talk about the trouble with peace. I think, Charles, should we get to some Vic Dan Teufel stuff? This overlaps some with
let's get into Vic Dan Teufel, because Vic Dan Teufel has a pretty interesting role to play in this book, I think. She kicks off this book in Westport to buy votes, which we kind of seen Glocta do this in the first Law trilogy. And she's trying to stage votes. She impersonates Shanked to sway a vote, and she actually ends up against all the odds.
Pays an actor too.
Yeah, pays an actor to impersonate Shanked. And against all the odds, she's able to secure swing votes in favor of Westport, sticking with the Union, which
she does.
No one wanted to stay with the Union. It didn't really make sense for them to stay with the Union, but she fought for those votes and got it done.
I really like Vic. She is, for me, the most improved character upon rereads. When I first read A Little Hatred, I was like, this character is not doing as much for me. But I've really come around on her, and she's interesting. She's more complex than she seems on the surface.
Right.
She presents this really rough exterior, but deep down you can tell she cares. She's just very jaded and inured to all these things that she's had to deal with for so long. But yeah, she's able to get that done. Her competence is without doubt, and then she pretty much heads back.
Well, there's a great line.
It should be noted that she a great line.
Yeah.
You're saying?
So when she's trying to swing votes, she's like, they like keep things the way they are, and one of the gentlemen she's trying to convince to sway the vote goes, but then it's difficult, isn't it, to make a passionate argument for what you already have? So boring. Whereas the delightful alternative, a bouquet of promises, a sack full of dreams, a glorious ship of fantasies undamaged by collision with actually getting anything done. And that is such a great line to kick off this book, because it's kind of the same thing that happens with Leo, where it's like, yeah, this whole passionate idea for what could be. Think of this, like, what we have, who cares? It's not exciting. And then you could also say that the same thing for these riots that are happening, the civil unrest as well. It's like, how can you defend what currently exists? Boring. Give me the alternative. So it's just a strong quote to kick off this whole book. It kind of touches on one of those themes of like people just running towards the shiny object.
Yeah, the great change, but from what to what? It's like the same thing, like you said, with Leo trying to make some sort of change because the closed council is corrupt, but you're going to put Isher on the closed council now? Right. Oh, yeah, that's going to be much better. So, yeah, this idea of it's a lot easier to sell the idea of things are bad now, so they should change, even if the idea of what it would change to, it's not actually any better. And like you said, big theme for this whole thing. Vic also gets for big First Law fans who have been following along all these books. She has a really interesting moment. One of the moments that actually bridges the gap between some of these larger forces in the world, meaning Monza Mercato's crew. She gets basically kidnapped by Casimir Dan Shanked and Shiloh Vitari, two people we remember well from previous books. Yeah, and
the Minister of Whispers.
It's interesting. It's another one where it's like a shame that these characters don't get to play a bigger role. It's just for me, it's actually kind of a shame that in general, like the Styrian characters don't get to play as big a role because there's so many great characters. Monza Mercato is completely missing in terms of any on-page appearances. She's referenced, so that part's a bummer. But it is a cool scene when Shanked shows up and Vitari, and they're basically like, hey, you're good at what you do. And the way that I deal with people who beat me in these little chess games is I say, you want to be on my team?
Right.
And
a lot of...
And they spare.
They do spare. A lot of Teufels negotiations are like, we both know that promises mean nothing. And then they somehow are just like, we trust that as long as it stays in your best interest, you'll stick around, kind of a thing. Is how she always kind of ends up. All these, quote, like, smart people, these negotiators, these players of these conspiracies are all like that. They're like, you can't expect me to actually say, yes, I'll join you, right? Like, that's not something that's going to happen. She has the same conversation with Pike at the end. But for right now, yeah, it's interesting to see them be like, so you want to join us? And she's like, you expect me to say yes now, but would you believe it? You know? And Vitari's like, okay, I can respect that.
Right, and Vitari's holding out hope that Vic will join in the end, so she gives her a bar, basically the address to a bar to go to in case she changes her mind. And that plays a role in connecting, even though she doesn't change her mind here, it does play a role in connecting Orso to...
Right, and the scene also does a few other things. One,
Chapo.
it exposes Vic to the truth behind Baez and Valentin Bach and the real power behind the Union. She also says, I owe Glokta. Like, that's what gets her off the hook and gets her free. Because Vitari can understand, because she worked with Glokta a lot back in before they're hanged. And
right.
I actually
before
think...
he was old Sticks. Young Sticks.
Yeah.
That's what she said. She was like, back when he was young Sticks.
When actually it was Glokta that spared her life, right? So I guess that, like, those phrases kind of let Vitari agree to let her go and giving her the contact information. And it's interesting that Vic also feels like she owes Glokta. And there's a bunch of conversations around that. Like, Vic has that conversation with Glokta later on. Vic has a similar conversation with Pike about, like, look, it's done to you, you do it to others, and you teach people to do it. And that just keeps it going, and you can't think about it. You can't feel too bad about it. It just happens and happens and happens. And that's kind of where Vic is right now with this book, too. It's like, I owe Glokta, so that's where I'm going to stay.
Definitely. And there's that moment where Glokta sits her down after Glokta has to step down, which I guess we didn't talk about in too much detail, but Glokta has to step down because he's affiliated with the rebels. He gets his daughter and his son-in-law, so he can't be the Archlector anymore, and Pike takes over. But he sits down with Vic, and he's like, you have to forgive yourself. Which is an interesting Glokta moment, right?
And forgive herself for betraying her brother, not like for anything that may have happened between the two of them. But it's like, hey,
right,
not your fault. You sold out your brother. He was going to get himself killed anyway. You were surviving. You bought your own freedom. You can't feel bad about that. Which easy for Glokta to say. He makes those hard decisions all the time.
Right, and with Vic, we get a lot of these moments with her negotiating with folks. She's always impressive. She always does a good job of saying just enough lie and just enough truth.
Right.
There's, like, she does that where she's sent over to say that she's a spy and in touch with Brint, and she's able to trick Savine even. Right,
because she stole the ring off of Brint's finger. And used that as like, Brent gave me this. It's like she's described as like the best liar there is. Like she calls herself like the best liar ever, and part of it is how she weaves in the truth.
Mm-hmm. And there's a great start to the chapter around then where she just goes through how she never really had natural facial expressions, so everyone was like, wow, she doesn't, like, growing up, she doesn't really show a lot on her face, so then she just practiced giving facial expressions, and then she's able to, she reaches a point where it's like, and then everyone was saying to me when I was a kid, like, oh, poor thing, her feelings are written right on her face, and it's interesting how she became such a great liar. I love that scene. And then I also love when she rolls up to get the message to Leo, And they're like, you could be a spy. And she's like, I am a spy for you. It's like, right? It's like, and it just goes,
Yeah, the
it's the
lead up to
good
that
liar
is so great.
stuff
She's
where
like, I'm
it's
about to
like,
pull off one of the best lies I've ever told. And it's like
right.
she's psyching herself up for it, and it's great. It's like-
Yeah.
and that's when she knew she had him. Time to dig it in, like dig the hook in, you know. And like here's the moment where I try and sell them on the real lie, you know. And like she's plotting it out. She has it all orchestrated. It was a really fun scene to read, and it's so funny to read Leo from the outside just hungrily snapping onto that lie and just eating a plateful of lies gladly. You're like, oh, come on, Leo. But she tricks Savine,
But
too.
not
That's
shocking. Yeah, tricking Savine is more impressive, and Gunnar Broad's also in the mix there, and he has a history with her. So it's very impressive. As Orso notices at one point, he's like, if we had like you know, I don't know how many he says, like 100 Vic Dan Teufels on staff, then we probably wouldn't even be fighting this war. But
exactly.
she is extremely competent.
Exactly.
And the only thing really to get into, I think, left with Vic is probably the reveal about Pike.
I think so. She does have this companion, right? Her assistant, which she's been blackmailing to stay with her, but also she's kind of showing some emotional connection to them. So it's like, that's like kind of a sub thing. It's like, does she dare to feel anything? You know? And then she's being told to forgive herself for her brother. Like these cracks in the facade, her facade are like starting to come in with Galacta leaving, and meanwhile, while she's dealing with all of that, she walks into her first trap, really, with Pike revealing himself to be the Weaver. And how fun is this, where, you know, we are first introduced to the world of the First Law. It's like one of the first chapters with Galacta torturing Pike, and now here we are at, you know, the end of Trouble with Peace, with Pike being the Weaver. It's kicking us off into the final book of the series. It's a full circle moment.
It is. And Pike has had such an interesting life, I feel like. He has been involved in so many important events. And he recounts some of them here. It's interesting to hear. I always love when they talk about West in these books. And he's like, yeah, I got sent to penal colonies by Galacta long enough to get my face all messed up. And then I ended up getting saved by Column West. He's like, that was a man to admire. And it's like, but they never live very long, do they?
Right.
And then he's like, so eventually I figured out I just got to align myself with Glock. He also was like, yeah, I held a shield in the fight between Fenris and Logan, like the Bloody Knives, like all this stuff. It's like, oh my God, Pike, you've been through it. You've been involved in all these things, these epic moments throughout the series.
Well said.
And now he's reached a point where he's revealing to Vic that he feels like there needs to be a great change. And he says the Weaver is a name that he has donned from time to time. It's a cool reveal, one that, again, is way better if you've read everything leading up to this.
Yes.
It's like kind of out of nowhere, I feel like, if you have only read the trilogy. It's like, oh, okay, I guess it was that guy Pike. But as you said, full circle in the circle of the world, Charles.
Indeed. Even like Sharp Ends, you get a little prequel to Pike and Galacta, and it's like, how far have we come since those days that we're now here on the precipice of a great change. Valentinbach is burning, and that leads us into the wisdom of crowds, essentially. That's how this book ends, is with Pike and Vic burning the city down. And then Pike's like, so you're going to join me, right? And she's like, I don't really have a choice, do I? Like, you side with the winners. That's what she always says. And, well, I think Clover says that, actually. I don't remember. But anyway, but
Clover does say that.
Clover says it too, at least.
But do they both say it in the same exact way? I think that exact quote is more of a Cloverism, I think. But either way, she has the same attitude, and she knows when she has no choice. I mean, Pike tells her, oh yeah, you could just go if you don't want to be a part of this. And she thinks back, it's like, this guy apparently has been on the side of the Great Change. And back in Valbeck, he hanged like hundreds of people. Right. And like, if that's what he'll do to people on his own side, I don't really want to cross this guy.
Exactly.
So
she describes it as falling into a trap. She's like, oh my gosh, I fell into this trap with Pike. Like, this is trouble. It's funny. It's like Pike starts talking about his story, and Vic's like, something's wrong here. I messed up somewhere, and I'm stuck in this situation. It's kind of funny. It sets this very ominous tone for like, you're not quite sure how to feel about what's happening right now. Vic is uncertain. Some crazy stuff is happening with this rebellion, and thanks to Brock, they're armed. Savine and Brock,
right?
Broad, I mean,
about that
Savine
so much,
and Broad,
yeah,
that they're
Savine.
armed now. So it's this whole chain of issues that leads us into the wisdom of crowds. But I mean,
but we can't get into the wisdom of crowds just yet, Charles, because we don't want to do the Dogman's daughter dirty. We have some other perspectives to talk about, and I think chief among them is probably Ricka.
Yes, we need to make sure we talk about Ricka's arc here. So we'll make sure we handle that as great a way as we can, given the time constraints here. So the main thing with Ricka is in the last book, she had opened her long eye, forced it open during the duel between Leo and Stour. And then she went through this chapter of having a bunch of visions, mixing up the present with the past and the future. It's basically made her like unable to function. She doesn't know what's reality, really.
Mm-hmm. And there are these almost Memento-like right. the Nolan film scenes. It's just like moving backward in time each scene.
Because this hasn't happened yet. Because this already happened. Yeah. The way that surreal chapter goes.
Right. It's like bounce back into the far past now. And then the whole thing was kind of trippy, honestly. Mm-hmm. And eventually we reach this point where they run to... we've been struggling to say this name since the original.
What's more trippy, Ricka's visions or the fact that Karib makes an appearance?
Karib, I think. Yeah, I thought, before we read The Trouble with Peace, I was like, at least we're done with that name. But we're back. It's Caurib, Karib. And
you think Stephen Pacey
she's the witch back in the good old days where there was that scene where the Dogman and Harding Grim, I believe, and then Black Dow were all kind of under her spell, and then Black Dow splits her head open with an axe. So
it was during Logan versus the Feared, and then it was Grim and Dogman that were under her spell. And Black Dow snuck up behind her and just caved her head in. It was so great. Classic. And he also really charged into the castle too. Black Dow did. It's like a funny series of events there. And who would have thought that Karib would survive? But apparently the Shanka stitched her skull back together with golden wire. And there's a funny line where she's like, "If I had all the answers, do you think I'd be here?" There's that moment where Rick is like, "How can you be sure?" It's like. He's like, I don't know. Look at me. It's a funny little story there about Karib getting some personality. So that's when she gets the crazy tattoos to control the maddening magic of the long eye.
Yep. And she basically had to choose between her two eyes. It's like, should she go full long eye or should she go full non-long eye? And she goes for the long eye. And Ricka has an interesting journey here, but we'll have to get further into it after we do the Dogman some some credit here. The guy, she comes back, and the dog man has passed away, and I feel like that's a really sad moment.
It is. I wrote in our episode notes, I wrote "Rip to the goat" because Dogman was the best of us, and off-screen death. It's almost like Rika was even like, what would her father think of her with these crazy tattoos, and he never got to see her, unfortunately. I mean, yeah, it was. I think we need to just kind of. There's some lines from the eulogy that Rika gives to Dog about the Dogman that I really liked. I want to make sure I grab it here, but such a sad moment for all of us first Law fans.
So, what do you think, Charles? Was the Dogman done dirty by this off-screen death?
That's a good question. I think it was tasteful. The guy got to go out on top. Everyone liked him. He didn't have a moment of like selfishness or hard decisions he had to make or anything. He got to go peacefully in his sleep with the respect of everyone that worked with him. In his giant mattress, because he's tired of sleeping on the cold hard ground. You got to find comfort where you can. It was a nice little character moment. As much as you like to think that an on-screen death for Dogman would have been nice, what would it have been? He died in his sleep. It's almost like,
I mean, he's not going to have this epic moment on the battlefield at that point. He was too kind of sickly and old and weak, and but now the Dogman's under the dirt.
Back to the mud, right? Under the dirt. I was like, was that? He's back to the mud for sure. And I'll just to do the Dogman respectfully here. I'm gonna read a piece of the eulogy. So let's all bow our heads, and here we go. In hard times, it's easy to become hard, but here was a man who always looked for the best in folk. Didn't always find it, but never gave up looking. Wasted no time polishing his own name, singing his own songs. Didn't have to. That may have been Shivers, actually, that said that. I don't remember. But great summary for Dogman. One of these rare characters in the Abercrombie universe that, goes out on top and liked, no regrets kind of a situation. And, R.I.P. the Dogman. We've had some heavy losses in this series. Real goats. Leaving us before their time. We've got Jazal, we've got Dogman. There's not many left of the OG crew, but Dogman was one of the good ones. No word
of what's going on with Logan.
Yeah, who knows with Logan? Glock is still around. Baez is around. Right. Who knows what's going on with God, what's her name? The POV.
Pharaoh?
Pharaoh, yes,
Pharaoh?
Yes, Pharaoh. Oh, I forgot Pharaoh.
Oh,
who knows?
Pharaoh is probably wreaking havoc.
Well, they say that Khalul was killed by a demon.
Yeah.
That was the rumor that we don't know for certain. But it's kind of funny that is probably her. But we can't be sure. We didn't see it with our own eyes. So
causing chaos in the South, I would imagine.
Chaos in the
Pharaoh.
South.
Yeah, no word from Pharaoh. And even less from Logan since Red Country. Well,
indeed, he rode off into the sunset. You got to think that that's the last we'll see of him, but you never know. We thought we were done with him before, and then he popped up in Red Country. So anything's possible. But no, it's not possible. Is Dogman coming back? He is very much dead. That brings us...
I don't know if Carib came back.
That's true. And she had her skull split.
Could get a zombie Dogman stitched together.
Dogman, demon Dogman. It's possible. Shivers is still around, and there were some nice moments, some nice Shiver moments in this where it's like, it's in this book, right, where he's like, I like squeezed the goat milk through a sack and raised you, and you gave me new purpose in life. And also there was a moment where he's like twiddling the ring on his finger, which is another great callback to
He's done that before too. Anytime he's talking about something that like reminds him of
Lost
his
love,
trouble and or just trouble and Styria and the lessons he learned. Sometimes he'll fiddle with that. Yeah.
Right. So those were some sweet, touching moments too. And Shivers still by her side. I love the Shivers Rika combo. It comes out strong when Rika's first act as the new dog man. She has to, as Isern always says, make of her heart a stone. She turns away Stour Nightfall, and she quickly forces Oxel, who's pro-North, and Red Hat, who's pro-Union, to fight to the death in the circle. And then, of course, when Oxel wins, he's like, yay, now we're joining the North, finally. She's like, no, now you have to fight Shivers. It's like
fight my champion.
Yeah, that is something I'd love to see put to film, because those moments are so tense. You get this moment, too, where everyone's just like, do we really have to fight right now? No one really wants to. And Rika's like, yeah, look, I made the circle. Here it is. Quickly. No one think too much about it. Like, let's go. You guys have an agreement? We're in the North. And then they're like, why don't you fight? She's like, oh, no, I wouldn't put my, female body parts in the circle. You guys do it. I don't know if we can say the T word on this
Probably can, but either way, yeah, it's a funny fight because they're both way past their prime, Oxel and Red Hat. So It's kind of, the way it ends is, it's more of an accident than anything. Who ends up winning.
Abercrombie captures this great mood in the room of like no one's ready they haven't worked themselves up to it. There's kind of like it seems almost kind of like a silly, awkward thing to do, to fight, which is like it's like, when is there ever a?
But Rika kind of put them in a position where it was the only option.
Right.
And then Shivers is there to fight Oxel, and I think Oxel tries to take Shivers by surprise, and it's like, Shivers is probably the most feared man in the North at this point. So
I wonder who would
Oxel
win in like Shivers versus Gorst. That'd be a good fight.
I do think about that sometimes. Yeah. I mean, I would side with Gorst probably.
Yeah, I mean, Gorst is just a powerhouse. But I don't know. Shivers learned some hard lessons,
I think the thing about Shivers is there's actual moments, at least in the past, where he seemed to meet someone who was his match, like even Friendly. Mm-hmm. Like, you remember the fight between Friendly and Shivers in Best Served Cold is an actual good fight, and I think we've just never seen anyone who is able to give Gorst a one-on-one good fight. So I'm going with Gorst.
Yeah, Gorst is a safe bet. Well, Jazal successfully defeated him in the tournament.
Oh yes, with no help whatsoever from any outside magical forces. You're correct.
It's true. That's a good match that we'll never see. Well, maybe we will see it in the next book.
Well, maybe in Wisdom of Crowns.
Yeah, maybe in Wisdom of Crowns. We'll see if they ever converge. I'm rooting for them. But anyway, Rick is in one fell swoop. She affirms her position as the new dogman, and she also says, "Look, we're staying independent." And she was able to do that in one fell swoop. And I think Rick is interesting because she recognizes she has to make the hard choices, and she's not afraid to make them quickly. She doesn't hesitate to make the hard choices. Isern has been counseling her whole life. Shivers has been counseling her whole life. And she's like, okay, this is what needs to happen. It's brutal. It's an awkward moment when these two realize they have to fight to the death and they don't really want to. And she's making it happen. It's kind of evil, but you can't argue with the results. Only 2 people died, and now her whole realm, her whole group is united. So props to Rika in those moments. We already talked about her talk with Savine and how Savine was kind of bullying her, so she kind of betrays them.
We mentioned Charles.
Yeah.
When Stour comes to visit, there's this moment where Clover and Shivers see each other, and Shivers is like, hey, we really need to have that talk we've been mentioning.
Yes.
And that's
I caught that my second time on the read through. I didn't really pick up on that the first time, but when we reread it in anticipation for this episode, I was like, yeah, he does be like, you and I have to have a talk. And it's like, so this is where it was. This is where it was forming, where it was happening.
The seed was planted.
Indeed, the seed was planted. Not to be confused with
Not that seed. Yes, not that seed.
That seed was not planted. I think Baez has it. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure he does.
No, that's what Pharaoh has the seed.
Oh, Pharaoh still has the seed? Oh, she stole it.
Yeah, that's what she ran off with at the end. That's where she's getting all that power to be able to cause all those.
That's right.
Issues.
If Baez still had it, who knows what he'd have done?
Baez couldn't wield it. That's why he had Pharaoh in the crew.
Well said.
Needed someone demon blood.
Exactly.
Anyway,
not that seed.
We digress.
Second digress in the past 10 minutes, but that's okay. So, yeah. So Rika agrees to join the Alliance, but she betrays them, tips off Orso. And then after the battle, the battle's happening, she just goes and takes Scarling's Hall and sits in Scarling's chair, which makes bold move, makes sense, right? Stour Nightfalls sails for Midderland, leaving it open, and what she does is she uses a little bribery and kills a few key people and manages to work her way in. And that was kind of a fun series of events. She has the chest of gold at the gates and she opens it and she's like, now this gold is for whoever lets me in, and whoever doesn't is gonna get attacked. And she just instantly commands that respect, and people start following her without even realizing it. It's because she's able to create these situations. She's prepared, and she's forces people to make fast choices on their feet. Doesn't give them time to think. It's like, hey, do this or you die. And it's like, oh, okay, makes sense. Let's go. And she secures Scarling's chair, and also has Clover betray Stour in one fell swoop. She's sitting pretty at the end of this book here.
That she is. And probably another thing worth mentioning is she comes into her own in this book with how to use the long eye as more of a political maneuver rather than just, actually trying to interpret it honestly. Like when she shows up to take Scarling's chair, she's like, I've already seen myself sitting on that thing, so I know that I end up there. It's just up to you all how you want to handle me getting there. Do you want to die on your way, or do you want to make money on the way? Where do you people as my enemies want to benefit?
It brings me back
to I'm going to take that chair. I've seen it already.
Exactly.
And she uses it to freak out Stour Nightfall's crew. She tells Greenway, she's like, hey, you're going to die on the water. And then he's freaked out of water the rest of the way.
And it comes true.
It does come true.
But it reminds me of that quote I read earlier in the episode. I find reputations rarely fit people all that well. What are they, after all, but costumes we put on to disguise ourselves? And here's Rika using the long eye and her reputation to move things along a bit faster. She's like, look, I have the long eye. I've seen it. Leave the planning to me. Don't worry. Just go and do what I want you to do, and leave the, future seeing to me. I got you. You can trust me. She's using that reputation to plant herself in Scarling's chair, and it worked pretty seamlessly. She's made an enemy of Black Calder, which he is a dangerous guy to get tangled with. We've rooted for Calder in the past with the heroes, and now here he is as public enemy number one. It's going to be an interesting matchup as we set into the wisdom of crowds.
Last thing worth mentioning is she brings the nail to her side, and the nail is at the beginning of the book. We had that moment where Stour is putting the nail's father in the cage, and he ends up killing him, and that ends up being one of those seeds of the past that what grows fruit in the present. That was a quote, but where we get Clover and the nail and Shivers all together taking their vengeance on Stour.
Right.
But we definitely need to get into Gunnar Broad and Clover to some extent. I think we've covered
We've covered a lot
things
of Clover. I will say his chapters are like really funny. I always appreciate his chapters and the crew he has. The lady who's just slicing the cheese. And, there's a couple of those character moments are fun. And the way he's trying to help people. There's that line where it's like, oh, I never thought I'd like be putting heads in a sack. It's like, well, no one sets out to do that. It just kind of happens to you, and well, there you are. He's like, I love how the phrase better do it than live with the fear of doing it kind of permeates in the new generation. People attribute it to different people, and even like Leo saying it.
Well, a lot of it came from the Dog Man.
Right. Ricka's saying it. Right. But Shivers is saying it. I think Clover says it. I can't remember. Maybe not. But it's just funny to see some of those isms coming through up in the north.
Right. And that originally came from Logan's father. Not even Logan.
Well, who knows who it
dad
came
said
from.
that at some point, and now, yeah, true. But now it's just spread
origin,
all over the north.
Yeah, this is one of those isms. I'm trying to think. Clover has shown that there's that scene where he kills some of his own men when they accidentally kill some peasants. There's the scenes where he's trying to get the wolf to retreat. He's this voice of wisdom, but he has a weird philosophy. It's kept him alive, but it's also just like this, you betray whoever, you side with the winners, this, that, and the other. And then the scene where he betrays Stour is so great. And then when he thinks of Wonderful in those moments too, because the end of A Little Hatred, where he kills Wonderful, is so shocking, and it makes you rethink a lot about Clover. And then he kind of is like, I had no choice, and now here's my redemption. All about seizing those little moments.
Yeah, for all Wonderful cares about it, right?
Right, exactly. You still killed your friend. Some would say, you'd sooner die than kill your friend or something. But, it is what it is. Guy's a survivor in hard times.
Yeah. So I take out the tendons behind both
was,
knees for Stour. It's a brutal. For some reason, it's visceral, right? Yeah. When it happens, for all the violence that we deal with in these books, there's something about that moment that you almost feel it, right?
Yeah, when you think about how much pain and suffering Stour's caused, even when he's the victim, you're still like, ooh, that's kind of brutal. Right. Kind of harsh, don't you think?
I think the way it's described is it's like a casual moment for someone like Shivers, or he just kind of does it in an almost offhand seeming way, and then they're like, oh, you shouldn't just leave him lopsided now. He takes out the other one. It's sudden, it's brutal, and does the great wolf deserve it? You can definitely make a case for that, but
and then there's the whole conversation around you didn't earn your name. Everything you got, you were given to from Calder. There's harder names out there. We're done with you, kind of a thing. And it's the same lesson that Leo had to learn to some extent of inheriting all this stuff. Orso's living it. He has learned the lesson, but there's not much you can do about it, kind of a thing with Orso as much. But yeah, it's those interesting dynamics, and it comes that arc that theme comes to a head with the betrayal of Clover to Stour, where it's you didn't earn any of this. You have no respect, and you've just charged into blunder after blunder, and I'm done with you. And that's how we kind of end all the northern stuff.
I do like that moment you're talking about with you didn't earn your name, because he goes through some of these legendary heroes that we know well, right? I think he mentions the Bloody Nine, and he talks about some of these guys that we're very familiar with, and Blacked Out, not necessarily people worth looking up to, but anyway, he has this name, Stour Nightfall, that's literally, I believe he was born during an eclipse. And even that, it was oh, well, it wasn't exactly during the eclipse, but it was the same night. And it's an interesting thing to point out from Clover where the name, it's literally given to him because of the day he was born.
Right.
It plays on that theme of you didn't earn this. You were literally born with a name about the day you were born.
Right.
And meanwhile, these people
earned it through deeds.
These other people earned them.
Right.
Yes. Even Calder, who earned the name Black Calder by taking the North from Black Dow and having, what character was it that called it? It was
Stranger Come Knocking.
Stranger Come Knocking.
Yeah.
Great memory there, Charles. Stranger Come Knocking was like, no, he's black. Black Calder.
Who turned out to be a plant from Bias, by the way.
Yes. I was like, I don't know if he just thinks that black is like the name that you pass on to the next, like an honorific, to the next leader of the North, but whatever.
It sticks.
So, Black Calder.
Yep. That'll be an interesting enemy to face for sure. The last character we need to talk about here is Gunnar Broad. And we'll go through him pretty quickly. He doesn't do too much in this one. He kind of reminds me a lot of Logan in some ways, where he like swears off violence, but meanwhile everything he does brings himself towards violence. It starts with his family working for Savine, and his whole family's happy. They're way higher social status, economic status than they were before. And that leaves Broad resentful and conflicted. Like, he's always like wringing his hands. He's always got this taste for violence.
Well, it's good to have a routine, Charles.
It's good to have a routine, exactly. The thing where he's always fiddling with the glasses. It's kind of funny. But in Angland, Savine gives Broad a new task, which is to make contact with the Breakers and bring them into the alliance that is forming against the Closed Council. And, of course, that gets him in touch with Judge. And the way he gets Judge to like let him go and agree to take up arms is that he was involved in this attack on like a mayor of a bank of Valentin Balk. It's like, okay. And then he goes along with it the whole way.
And we have these moments where he just can't help himself but get extremely violent.
Right.
Like he kind of breaks down and goes into full, he goes into full, I don't want to say like a full rage, but once he gets going, he will get very, very violent very quickly. And Judge is kind of having some of those moments. Almost that remind me of when Black Dow looks at Column West and he's like, nice. Respect. Right?
Way to go, Furious.
He's like, I knew you had it in you, and he calls him Furious. It's like those moments are kind of Judge looking on Broad. It evokes that where it's like, I knew you're a man of violence. You're just like me. You're not happy unless things are getting bloody. Right. And of course, Broad's like, oh no, I don't want to be like that. That's not who I really am. I'm just trying to keep my family happy. It's like none of the decisions you make resemble the choices that you'd be. I mean, I get the idea to some extent that what he's doing for Savine is the best way to give the other members of his family a good life, but he's not exactly passing up opportunities to get violent.
Certainly not. And what's interesting about when he does get violent is he's just, like, his chapters kind of go by and you're like, okay, but he plays key pivotal roles sometimes when he shows up. And the key thing that he does in this book is he's like helps keep Leo alive in those final moments, you know? And can you imagine if Broad wasn't there, what could have happened? Leo could have potentially died in battle. And so the fact that he's there, that key act of violence when it's needed, he comes in, maybe he changed the tide, who knows? I mean, certainly Orso had the opportunity to hang Leo and chose not to, but there is Gunnar Broad always popping up on behalf of Savine to kind of save the day with this burst of competent violence.
Very true. There are these moments where history turns on the actions of Gunnar Broad.
Exactly.
Which, yeah, those are very interesting because he just doesn't seem like he comes from very humble
He's not political.
beginnings.
He's got no aspirations. He's happy to
Yeah.
serve Savine, but because he's pointed in a direction and told to go, and he's very competent when he does go, and he's committed more to violence than to any sort of side. Maybe saving Leo is not the best thing for anybody, but he's that's where he's told to go, and he's okay, and then he goes and does it. It's men like that can turn the tide just as much as someone like Leo or Savine or something like that.
True.
So
History won't remember him in all likelihood. He's not going into
doesn't even
any
recognize him at
textbooks
all.
or whatever. Yeah, but the history would have forever been altered without the actions of Gunnar Broad.
Exactly. So one of the smaller POV characters, but certainly not to be discarded. And we look to see how he faces the great change and his relationship with the Burners and Judge and all of that as we go into Wisdom of Crowds. It's certainly
to go into
exciting
Wisdom
premise.
of Crowds. We must, Charles. I think that we've covered. How long is this episode?
It's going to be 2.5 hours.
2 hours and 15 minutes, something like that. But honestly, I feel like we owe the listeners, after this long wait, a nice big episode like this.
Yes.
And once we get talking Abercrombie, we just can't stop, it feels like.
We can't stop. And there's only one more book left, so we need to treasure these moments while we can. I'm sure we'll have, character breakdowns and this, that, and the other. But in terms of literature, we only have one book left in the First Law universe. So we must treasure these conversations while we can.
That is so true, Charles. And I always treasure these conversations with you, my lifelong friend. But for now, Charles, I think we did this book justice.
Mm-hmm.
I hope to do the same when we go on to the Wisdom of Crowds. There's a lot to talk about in that one. We've both already read that, but we'll be sure to do a nice reread to get fresh and ready for another deep dive into a First Law book. And then it's so weird, Charles. It's so weird to think that there'll be no other available First Law content for us to talk about. Obviously, like you said, we'll keep analyzing the First Law even once we've talked about each of the
on this
books,
journey a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, and
right
here we are, near end in sight.
But there'll be, Abercrombie, as he said in our interview, is a bright, young voice in this genre with a lot more stories to tell. Last I heard, he was working on something that was actually not in the First Law universe at all, called, was it The Demons or The Devils? Let me see if I can search that up real quick. But then, based on what we talked about in the... Let me see if I can
interview.
Find this. The Devils is slated for publication in 2025? Joe. I hope he's not listening.
I mean,
there's
the
no
guy
way
just
he's
wrapped
making this.
up this trilogy last year, He's probably written a bunch. You know how he does. He finishes all the writing for a whole series and then slowly releases it after that. So maybe that's what we're getting here. But maybe we'll have to just ask him.
I thought it was a standalone, though. Yeah, maybe we will have to just ask him. I would find it hard to believe that Joe Abercrombie would not publish a book for 3 years. That seems unlike him, but I guess how long was it in between the standalones?
And he deserves a break, All these thoughts in your head can't be good for your long-term health. It's good he got him out in writing, and we all get to love it, and now he gets to, do other things. He wrote that Love, Death, and Robots episode. At least we forget that.
He did. I'm looking now, I guess. So we had Red Country in 2012, and then he wrote Sharp Ends in 2016. So I guess we've had breaks like that. He wrote, he wrote some other books in between. He wrote Half a King.
He had the YA series.
The YA series, yeah. All right, but I don't know if we've gone 3 years without a single Abercrombie book before, but there's plenty of content to get into in the meantime. You don't have to worry about that, and we're excited for when that next book comes out. And based on what he told us a while back, he does seem to plan to continue to move the First Law world forward. There was a moment where I said, First Law in space? And I believe Joe Abercrombie was like,
he did not deny it. We'll say that.
Right. Well, it seemed almost like, I don't want to give myself too credit, but almost like I kind of put a little idea in his head.
You planted the seed, dare we say?
I planted the seed, but not that seed.
Not to be confused with the seed. It was a seed, not
just
the
a seed.
Very different.
So yes, if you do one day see a First Law in Space series, is it all thanks to me? Of course it is. But I'm too modest to take credit.
So humble and modest indeed. But well, maybe who knows? But those will be exciting times. Baez, I could buy him as like a Bezos type. He just becomes a business conglomerate guy and launches rockets.
Is it just because he's bald, Charles? I mean, these last couple anyone who's listened to our Rings of Power episode already knows that Charles has some sort of affinity to bald men, where he sees them as father figures, and now he sees Baez, who's bald.
Well, come on, what would who in modern history could be considered a Baez type? Be honest with yourself. It's one of these guys. It's one of these capitalist billionaire guys launching stuff into space. Like, it's definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably Bezos. I can't think of a better Baez modern.
Like, you can't pick like a president. Like, that's like a Ghazal type. You have Ghazal the president, and then you have Baez the CEO of Amazon. Like, that's where how the power breaks down. So
yeah, I mean, I was thinking Bezos is probably the best. Elon Musk is too wacky. He's kind of
not him.
Yeah, all over the place.
No,
he's like a wannabe Tony Stark.
Yeah, exactly.
Is Elon Musk. I was thinking Elon Musk. I'm like, you wish that you were Iron Man. Yeah. You were trying so hard to be Tony Stark. But we've had a lot of billionaire talk on the podcast last couple episodes.
Yeah, I think that's a sign we just need to end this thing already.
Yeah, we should probably call it.
Let's get this outro music pumping. What do you say, Dylan?
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right. Thank you all so much for sticking through to the end of yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, check us out over on social media. We're always down to chat. First Law, all these TV shows coming out. We have a lot of discourse going on, and that's over at Instagram at the FTF Podcast and Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show and they already follow us on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. That especially goes out to you, Spotify listeners. You just got to 2 clicks away. You just got to click that star rating option, toss us 5, and it helps us so much if you're able to do that. It really does. Apple Podcast listeners, you can throw us a rating and a review as well, but just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Just listening, guys. Thank you all so much for listening. We greatly appreciate it. Hope to see you again next time, and as always, go forth and conquer, friends.